So, ladies and gentlemen, the ICICI Lombard is a part of Marcellus' large cap and mid cap portfolios. Mr. Bhargav Dasgupta is MD and CEO at ICICI Lombard General Insurance Company Limited. He's also known as the Aditya Puri of general insurance. Bhargav's philosophy of customer centricity has enabled the company to introduce several best-in-class risk management solutions backed with the latest tech platforms to meet the risk mitigation needs of ICICI Lombard's customers. Bhargav began his career with the erstwhile ICICI Limited in 1992, and he has held critical leadership positions in diverse business areas in the ICICI Group, including project finance, corporate banking and treasury, e-commerce, strategy, international banking, and life insurance. He also set up the international banking group of ICICI Bank and built its presence in 15 countries within 4 years. The international banking business strategy became a case study at the Harvard Business School. Prior to the current role at ICICI Lombard, he was the executive director of ICICI Prudential Life Insurance during October 2006 to May 2009. Mr. Bhargav Dasgupta holds a PGDBA from IIM Bangalore and a BE Mechanical degree from Jadavpur University. He is currently the chairman of FICCI's Insurance and Pension Committee and is the director on the board of BFSI Sector Skill Council of India. He is also a member of IRDAI's Insurance Advisory Committee. It's an honor for us to welcome Mr. Dasgupta on the stage and begin the session.
This one? Yeah. Just a couple of clarifications and an update. The ISC position is for 2 years, and my 2 years just got over, so I'm no longer on the ISC. Just to correct that, it's an older, version. So, okay, morning everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Saurav is an investor that we really respect a lot, and we see his views about investing in good companies and staying invested for a longer period of time. As an insurance company, that's a style that we like as well. We believe in being contrarian investors and staying invested for a long time. So today, it's an interesting subject that sort of asked me to talk about, which is not about numbers, but about the people strategy, right? So, and you typically come to these conferences and no one asks these fundamental questions because numbers are always an outcome. There's a reason those numbers happen. And our strong conviction is that in financial services or any services business, probably the most foundational capability or competency that you need is the people aspect. So I was very happy to take this up. Normally I don't come for these conferences much, but this one, given the topic, I said, let me come for this. So, but again, going back to the fact that this is an investor conference, let me start with the entire value creation slide. We are in the insurance business. If you look at, Warren Buffett's annual reports, he'll always talk about last 50 years, what's happened to the stock. And that's the way to look at insurance, not look at quarterly, not look at annually, look at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Extremely powerful value creating businesses if it's run well. And again, just to give you another, sense of the numbers that we've given you numbers from 2008 onwards, simply because 2008 was a year that India got, insurance industry got de-tariffed. Till that time, prices were fixed. And once it came down, prices crashed by about 90% in the first couple of years. It kind of has, stabilized since then, but still remained low. And if you look at the industry growth, in spite of the 2 COVID years where growth came down, industry has grown about 15% CAGR. Our growth has been a bit less at about 13% CAGR. Largely because certain lines of businesses we've stayed away, chunky businesses which are not very profitable, some crops, some mass health businesses. But otherwise, rest of the business we've kept on gaining market share. What is more interesting to see is that the business has got more and more granularized. We were more a wholesale business, and if you look at the policy count, from 3.5 million policies, last year we had about 32 million policies. Just to give you a sense that one policy does not mean one customer. A lot of policies have more than one customer, so the number of customers that we serve is much more. What's even more interesting is that if you look at the profitability CAGR of this industry, right? So from 2008 to 2023, the industry actually degrew in terms of profits. The total profits of the industry in 2008, aggregate profits, was higher in 2008 than what it was in 2023. Because industry as a whole made losses last year, in fact last 2 years. Even if you go back to the year that industry aggregate made a profit, 2021, the industry CAGR of profits, if you took that data for 13 years, was about 2.4%. So industry profitability has not picked up in the same pace as the top line growth has been. In this environment, our profit CAGR has been about 20%. So we are about 17x the amount of profits that we made to 14 years back. And lastly, the topic that we want to talk about, which is the people and culture. If you look at our productivity, interestingly, as this company has scaled, the aggregate headcount for this company has actually reduced in 14 years. We had 14,600 people in 2008. Today we have 14,400 odd people. So it's kind of remained flat. And in a sense, you may wonder that why am I here talking about people and culture when our headcount hasn't really grown. But jokes apart, I think, as I said, I think the key driver for performance in financial services, and in fact, I would argue that in any services business, is people and culture. So let's look at what is it that we do, the topic that we wanted to talk about. And if you see the topic, we are talking about hiring, retaining, and training. Those are the three topics that we were asked to talk about. But human resources is slightly broader. So if you look at the way we look at people management, there is of course the recruitment, the training, the leadership development, and retention. But there's also an organization design aspect, and I'll touch upon that. There is employee engagement and a connect aspect. There is a performance management aspect. And finally, and probably the most important aspect is culture. Because at the end of the day, I think the organization that you create, whether it's an institution or not, is driven, and whether it consistently performs over decades is based on the culture that you create in the organization. So let's go to some of these aspects. So if you look at organization design, one of the things that we look at is, I've talked about 4 pillars, right? One is talent, acceleration. What do we mean by that? What we mean by that is, and this is a philosophy of ICICI Group in general, we don't wait for people to be ready for those roles. We are willing to take risk with people if we find the right aptitude and right attitude in people to challenge them with leadership roles earlier than where most other companies will think about. So we talk about talent acceleration. We really take risk with people. And over the 30 years that I've been in ICICI Group, I think that's something that I've seen work really well. And that's a practice that we continue even in ICICI Lombard. The second, topic there is, beyond traditional productivity approaches. And, our business, for example, I'll just give you a small example. So everyone talks about span, number of levels, etc., and looks at productivity through those lenses. We have, certain businesses that are seasonal. We are a funny company where people are doing different roles during the different parts of the year. So someone may be doing, let's say during season, a crop business, and rest of the year he may move to some other function. It's quite dramatic. It sounds quite dramatic, but we've built some of those capabilities because insurance, as you've seen, is not a business where we work with fat margins. So we have to think about how do we keep our costs under control and look at higher productivity measures, even though we run very different businesses during different parts of the year. Of course, we do the standard things in terms of delayering the organization, looking at what is the span of control, etc. But I just want to talk about 2 aspects here. When I talk about the organization design and delayering the organization, our conviction, our strong belief is that today's organizations, particularly in large-scale financial services organization, you have to think of creating a 2-speed organization. The first, traditional organizations were command and control, right? Very designed from the military systems. Someone at the top, the general who gives instructions and everything flows down. Those organizations are not great for creativity, for innovation. But in a large format sales organization, you need that capability because the whole organization has to move like a machine when you're talking about running businesses. So then there is still need for that organization. But the organization of future, when you talk about innovation, when you talk about creativity, when you talk about building new systems and new products, has to be a lot more agile organization. So you need that as well. So you can, I mean, typically what you see in most management literature, etc., or consultants will come and say that become agile. Of course, you have to become agile, but you have to also hold the other part of the organization, which is, in a sense, the old command and control organization, because that's what giving you the day-to-day sales and revenue, etc. That engine has to keep on firing, but you have to build the second component as well. So one of the things that we did about 6 years back is our digital business, we carved out into what we call a company within a company. We said this is a team which is completely agile. We house it with different people processes, different structures, completely self-contained with an advisory board. And we said this is a business which needs different capabilities and build it that way. The experiment has worked really well for us. We launched our revamped mobile app. We obviously had no mobile app, but we launched our mobile app, a revamped mobile app in 2019, I'll Take Care, with the same philosophy. And we are now looking at all other parts of the organization where this is the model that works. So delayering in that sense for those functions is very different because there's no layers. It's an agile team which works together as one layer. The fourth principle that we always adopted, and we constantly look at our processes, is what we call eliminate, automate, empower. Eliminate means every time that you look at things that you do, you look at whether that decision process or the organization process adds value to the end customer, right? Is it useful? Is it adding some value? You'll find in organization we have certain processes that are hard-coded. So you let's say have a sales team and there's an underwriting team and every decision is passed to the underwriting team. Very soon you realize that the underwriting team is actually not really taking any decision. It's just a checkbox, but it's a process, so they have to approve it. And you then decide whether you even need that aspect. So one is looking at every process constantly, and it's not as if we do it once in a while and forget about it. It happens very, very frequently across different parts of the organization. Second is, if you need the process, can you automate it? So, and I was listening with a lot of interest to what, friends from ICICI were talking about. Very, very similar approach in terms of thinking about how do I use current technology to automate. And I'll give you a small example. So in insurance, underwriting for SMEs is a standard practice that most insurance companies do. Claim service for corporates is something where surveyor goes in and does it. As we speak, about 90% of our underwriting happens without a human intervention. And that's because of AI, and machine learning and, automation that we've done. That gives us tremendous power in the marketplace because an agent can sell an insurance policy at, 12 o'clock in the night on a Sunday night when no one is available because we've built the capability for doing that. As we speak, any claims below 5 lakh rupees for ICICI Lombard for SME clients is done through an automated process without any, obviously we have to have certain compliances, so we do a, final check, but most of the hard work is done by an automation tool. So that's the thought, the way we've, organized ourselves in terms of the organization structure, and honestly, one of the main reasons why we've kind of been able to deliver the productivity is because of this. The other aspect, which is one of the comments that we were asked to talk about, is how do you attract talent? And, if you think about a corporate's position, one of the positions that companies need is the position for customers, right? You have to have a certain value proposition for customers. You have to think about the same way with employees. You have to have a employee value proposition. And we've thought a lot about our value proposition. Of course, you're working with, the leading company in insurance, but the key value proposition that we talk about is your career development and your capability development. Those are two things that you get with ICICI Lombard. And the approach that we've adopted is when we hire talent is that we don't hire for skills. We hire for attitude and we train for skills. That's the thought process. That, what you need is people with the right attitude and skills you can impart. The other aspect that we've learned over the years is the referral programs, internal referral programs. We call it Those That Work, which is employee referral programs. 70% of our hiring happens from people who recommend their own friends, and it's cost effective, and we see the quality of hiring to be much better. And there is no monetary compensation. A lot of companies give money for referring. We don't, and that's also part of our value proposition. We are willing we are keen to attract people because it's a good place to work, not because someone is getting money to be attracted. Third aspect that we look at is activation. How do we get someone who comes on board start functioning as soon as possible? So one is that there is a pre-boarding process. So a lot of the training, etc., material that people start once they come into organizations, we do it 15 days before. So the basic stuff about ICICI Lombard, about the insurance industry, we send the content out. They have to learn it and get trained for it. But we have a 30, 60, 90-day rule to make people absolutely productive by 90 days. So that's a very focused engagement that we do to get people start firing. And finally, at the end of the day, people have to be productive. But what we measure very, very closely is that within 4 months, we assess people for confirmation, right? And we see 96% of the people that we hire are confirmed. And that's a very important metric for the entire team which is managing it, because if you hire and people are not living up to the expectation that we have, then it's a problem, both in terms of business as also in terms of the employee value proposition that we have. Now, driving high performance is something that every company will talk about. I'll not spend too much time on this. I mean, of course, there's a goal setting, etc. But the key aspect of goal setting is how do you align that with the organization objective. But the second point I want to spend a bit of time on, which is monitoring of performance. Now, monitoring is not by someone else, the boss monitoring your performance. That, of course, happens in any organization. But one of the principles that we have is that when you get good guys in the team, one, you have to give them all the tools to perform, you have to empower them to perform, but you have to give them the information for them to see where they stand in terms of performance. You cannot come at the end of the year and say, okay, this year you didn't do well, so and so. But so what we do is every month we give you a performance, based on your KPI. Where are you in terms of your KPI performance? Every quarter we give them the relative standing to your peers, where you are. So if I'm someone who's interested in performing, I know that I am right now in maybe the bottom quartile. I have to pull up my socks and perform. That we believe is a very important enabler, for people to step up their act in terms of performance. And of course, the evaluate performance and reward for performance, which is very common. I talked about the engagement bit, and I think one of the most important, aspects that we believe we've built is the amount of conversation that we have with the organization on most of our key business strategies, as also the principles or our credo. I mean, when we talk about Vishwas culture, that's our the organization credo. It's a principle or guiding principle of how we conduct ourselves and aligning the organization, across all of that. So there are multiple platforms that we have for engagement. We strongly believe in empowerment, as I talked about in the beginning. And when we look at the feedback that we get from our employees, almost every company will come and say that we take dipstick surveys, we take employee feedback, etc. But what you do with that is more important. So every year, of course, apart from the dipstick surveys and the real-time stuff that happens, there is a very, very detailed Vishwas survey that we do of the organization. At this point in time, 96% of the people say that they see demonstration of those Vishwas pillars being practiced on the ground. And that's a true reflection of whether it's just empty talk or people experience it. End of that survey process, we go out to the ground and we share the feedback with as much transparency as everything that I get to see, people get to see. And there's a discussion on any aspects there where we are not performing up to the mark. And it's that level of transparency and openness that we've built. I remember about 15 years back when we set up our vision statement, we designed it at the top 60 people in the organization. I thought about it, brainstormed and came up with it. We said this is a draft vision statement. We sent it out to the entire organization, that 14,000 people that time. We got 3,500 comments on that statement at that point. And that's how we co-created it. And that's the philosophy that we've continued to adopt over the last 14, 15 years. And we believe that's a very, very important reason why we have strong engagement scores, and people understand what we are doing and why we are doing what we are doing. Again, the engagement principles has multiple levels of discussion. I meet every new joinee at a certain band every month, about 100 odd people every month. I personally meet my Mancom members have town hall meetings, etc. But there are quite some of the other aspects which are quite interesting, which again commonly practiced I believe by most go-to organizations. End of the quarter, after a board meeting, after the feedback that we get from Saurav and all the other guys, we have a session with our top leadership, maybe about 120 odd people, discussing the quarter performance, what worked, what didn't work, brainstorming about what we need to do, and action planning on all of that, including feedback for investors, board, and everyone else. We have, as I said, the Ignite Wave, which is a business strategy that we do, a session that we do annually. That and the Vishwas survey scores are given down, to the larger organization. The entire senior leadership and the senior and middle leadership travels across the country, physically does these town halls with people. It's a one-day workshop in terms of what our strategy for the next year would be, and what is it that our survey scores are telling us. And it's a lot of feedbacking session that happens. Those feedbacks are collected, and we action whatever can be actioned out, and we communicate to the person who gave the suggestion that this has been implemented. So it's a very intense process that we follow in terms of communication. I won't spend too much time on talent assessment. I'm sensitive to the time issue that we have. Just to give you 2 data points. 100% of our business leaders key business leaders have a comprehensive development plan which is to gear them up for the future. And 90% of the critical jobs, we have a successor within the organization that is identified. And that's the depth of talent that we want to create, so that this is an institution that we are creating, not an individual who stays there for some time and moves out. And one of the jokes is that not only do we succession planning for the company, but we provide leadership to the entire industry. I don't know if it's a good thing or bad, but fact of the matter is that in spite of that, I think the organization has kept on producing great talent and continue to perform well. And that's, I think, a very key aspect of what we are focusing on as a company. I just want to touch upon this, the training point. Look, this is a very important aspect of what we do as an organization. So we have this philosophy of 70-20-10. 10 is classroom, everything else comes from learning from others or learning on the job. And there is a tremendous focus that we have on training, not just for ourselves, but for our distributors. We have this principle called leaders as teachers. All of us have to stand up and take classes. I have done that for a long time, not in the recent past, but in the past. Most of my team members do a lot of training themselves. We measure those training interventions. The 100% of the training interventions get a score of 4.5 on a score of 5. We measure the outcome. If there's most of these training interventions, about 96% of the focus on specific functional requirement, and we see that 80% of the time the objective that we had in terms of performance improvement, or let's say whatever outcome that we wanted to see, is delivered. We have multiple layers of training. So when you come into the organization, there's a base level of training called Code Orange, and it goes up to Code Maroon 1, Code Maroon 2, and then CAT 2. These are functional trainings. We have training for managerial effectiveness. We have a learning experience platform. People talk about customer experience. Similarly, this is a platform like a Netflix equivalent of training, using a lot of short videos and other content that we co-create or curate from across the world. So this is a very important aspect of how we build talent within the organization. And on this, and I'll end on this note, I think this is an area where we've probably got the maximum awards across the world. ATD, I can see Mr. Pai walking in. I think there are 2 or 3 companies. This is a American award. We've got the award for 11 years. I see 1 or 2 other tech companies in India who've got those kind of numbers, but globally there are very few companies which get this award even multiple times. We've got it about 11 times. And when you look at, the Chief Learning Officers Elite Award, Brandon Hall, across the world, there are multiple such awards on training and development. I think we score reasonably well on all of that. So that's the real story about what we've been doing as a company. I just wanted to introduce to everyone the guy who actually runs it. I'm just delivering the work that he does. Jerry Jose is our CHRO. Jerry, maybe you can just wave a bit to everyone. Thank you. Yeah.
Can we have the chairs on stage? Tej, would you want to join in the? You want to join there or here? Yes, please. Tej, even you can have a seat. Yeah, are you all still feeling cold? Because we have made it a little warmer, but if you're still feeling cold, we can, yes, you are? Hardik, can you please help? Yeah. Yeah. So please have a seat, I'll come with the please.
So Jerry, Bhargav, long before I ever got a chance to meet you guys, and long before we became shareholders in ICICI Lombard, we benefited from your excellent HR practices. In the year 2005, I hired this gentleman over there from ICICI Lombard. He just got out of IIT Delhi, and he'd worked there for a year. I knew so little about insurance. He told me he was a loss adjuster. I thought that was some sort of term which meant fudging things. Little did I realize loss adjusting is a central skill. So thank you for being here. We are significant shareholders. I think 6% of the wealth of the audience listening in today is invested in ICICI Lombard. So I'll start with the first question. Rishi is asking, we've often seen organizations not being able to retain top talent because there are more business units to elevate to. Basically, talent comes through, but there are not enough jobs at the top. How do you solve this problem at ICICI Lombard?
So, if you look at some, in our opinion, the three key factors in retention. One is what the Western press talks a lot about. It's the sense of purpose that people need to have in working for an organization. The second is career development. And the third is relationship with immediate boss. There are, of course, the monetary and everything else, the culture, etc. But I'll just focus on these three. Personally, I believe the first one is very important, but it may be more important for a certain self-actualizing group of employees, not the entire organization. So it's important, but it's not enough. I think the second one, which is the capability development, is very, very important. I mean, I was very recently in an insurance conference where the ex-CHRO of LinkedIn was talking. And interestingly, he said the same thing. He said, based on all our research, while people talk about other things, but the number one reason why people stay in an organization is if they believe they're progressing in terms of their career, if they believe they're learning a lot more and becoming better professionals. And as I said the third aspect is you don't want to work for a boss who's not a pleasant guy to work with. So I think that's why I think for us, we've kind of focused on the employee value proposition being career development and learning. We want to make individuals better professionals, better insurance, experts. Of course, we provide everything else in terms of the people, the culture, the balances, the tools, the compensation, etc. But those would be the outlying, services that we provide to our employees. We still lose people. Obviously, it's not as if we retain all our folks. But what we see when people leave ICICI Lombard is they go for jobs which are at least 1.5 to 2 levels higher than their current jobs. So they're looking for career, growth beyond what we are able to provide at that point in time, which we respect. At the end of the day, beyond a point, we cannot provide, roles to everyone. So what is more important for us then is to think about the bench. When we lose someone, do we have enough bench, for the organization to keep on performing? So that's how we look at it. Jerry, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, and the other aspect is also about the stretch that we give in the roles. I think so leaders really get their kick if they're handling jobs which are much far beyond their own capability and are able to stretch for the remaining 50% that they're doing their normal jobs. So when we really look at organization redesigning the jobs, It is basically it's made sure that people get that opportunity, leaders get that opportunity to basically get into roles which can basically push their capability to the next level. Yeah, and that itself is a big motivator. I don't think so. The market will have similar kind of opportunities which they are basically getting within the organization. So I think so that's a very important aspect of this.
I think just to emphasize, pretty much the entire general insurance industry in India is ICICI Lombard alumni. That's the level of talent that this firm has created. Tej.
A question linked to that is insurance as an industry is unique given it's an extremely long-tailed, long-cycle business. And we have seen, like the data shows, that for long periods of time, there are business segments which might not see growth and you might not want to pursue growth. In a business like this, how do you ensure that leaders remain motivated because key talent wants to see growth?
Just to relate an anecdote, the year we decided to stop writing crop business, in the board strategy session, the guy running the crop business came and made a presentation to the board to say why we should stop writing that business, which is quite unusual, right? No one wants to give up, their empire. And he came out and he says, Bhargav, this is very unusual. I'm coming and saying why we should not do our business. So I think it goes back to that original point that I made, that at the end of the day, there has to be complete alignment of purpose. People have to understand why we are doing what we are doing. Just because, sitting in Bombay, we just say that, okay, let's not do this tomorrow, it would create, and expecting that people will understand, that just doesn't happen. You have to engage the organization, you have to communicate with the organization as transparently as it's possible to explain what we are doing and why it makes sense to the larger objective. The larger purpose, the larger vision of the organization is very clear to everyone. All of us wear it in our lanyard card. So people understand why we are doing what we are doing. At least that's what we think. So when we do take some of these decisions, it's not easy for the operating folks for whom there's a change. But the larger objective is very, very clear. And in the past, people have seen us, go in and go out of certain businesses without it affecting their own personal, career or progress. So we find alternate, roles for them. We move them into other jobs. And in a sense, their career doesn't get affected because we are taking a business or strategic call to maybe defocus from a certain business. And I think the point is that insurance is a business where you need to have a portfolio of, choices. And there will be times when certain businesses will do well, certain businesses won't do well. This is the cycle of insurance that works across the world, and you have to optimize your business and toggle your business. You have to build that capability, we believe.
So I'll come to a question which I think perhaps is on many people's minds. The person who has sent me this question hasn't put their name, but I think it's a relevant question. So we have seen plenty of players enter motor insurance. So Acco, GoDigit, most recently I think Jio has also made it clear that they will enter motor. And I guess because the concern is with so many players coming in, and I'm sure they're willing to burn up money, they will end up eating up market share. How do you see this playing out for ICICI Lombard?
I think in insurance, the cycle is to do with capital cycles, right? In insurance, when you see a sector do well, a lot of capital gets attracted to the sector, and then, rates go down, people burn, and then they realize that they made a mistake and they step back. And then the cycle turns again. This is typical insurance cycle globally, whether you look at reinsurance or direct, more so in reinsurance, but also in direct insurance. So it's in a sense par for the course. Great organizations, great insurance companies stay disciplined about what creates sustainable value. And when the cycle turns, they're in a stronger wicket to take benefit of that situation. So if you look at, even for us, we've not been listed for the period that I put the numbers out for. But if you look at 2014, 15, we were kind of very flat. 2008, 9, 10, we were very flat. But there are years where we've grown significantly higher. So to come back to the specific question, I think we've seen, in motor insurance, a couple of things have changed in the last 2 to 3 years. One was COVID. COVID actually was very, very positive for motor insurance business because people are not taking their cars out, right? So the number of trips, consequent number of accidents, everything came down. So motor insurance did really well in that year. That made people very, very, complacent and aggressive about pricing. Second thing that happened, I don't know how many of you, kind of understand this at that level of detail, but if you look at third-party, claims, they come with a lag. They come with a lag because accidents can be reported anytime. The law has now changed, but, in the past, that's how it was. It can be intimated at any point in time, and the court would take their own time to, submit the documents to insurance companies. So during the COVID period, of course, accidents came down, but what also happens where courts were closed. So when courts start reopening, people start getting those claims. It was very difficult to figure out whether the volume of reduction of claims was because of COVID or because of this delay. And I think people have made mistakes. In our opinion, people have made mistakes in and assuming certain reduction, systematic reduction, which probably hasn't happened. It was just a one-off reduction. So the systematic reduction would mean that, claims have come down consistently. We believe part of the reduction is because the courts were a bit delayed in reopening, not because of accidents did not happen. So all of these data models that we've had went for a bit of a toss for 2 months, number one. Number two, I think a lot more capital came in, as sort of mentioned, and people are very aggressive to grow at any point in time. So what can happen going ahead? I think the people who are very aggressive this year, we've seen quite a few of them, take a back seat. Some amount of pricing improvement we are seeing happen. And now the question is, will there be a new player who will again become very, very aggressive? Always possible. But as I said, in insurance or any regulated financial services businesses, I think the quality of underwriting is what creates value. And you have to stay disciplined on that. Moment it comes back, you gain market share back. That's what we believe will happen.
So just to be clear, right, why are we invested in ICICI Lombard? Bhargav showed you the slide. In the last 15 years, this industry hasn't made money. I mean, it makes money a little bit, but fundamentally, the general insurance industry in India makes no money, right? It's sabka saath, aapka vikas, right? These guys have compounded profits at 21%. 21% in an industry which makes no money. In 15 years, the industry has made no money. These guys are compounding profits at 21%. Now, I'm going to preempt a question which I know is going to come in the afternoon. So, a lot of people in our country go, XYZ company entered telecom, other telecom companies lost their profitability. There's a difference between that and financial services. See, in telecom, you got a license. Once you got a license, if a new fellow enters and he's undercutting you, you've got nowhere to go. So you drop your prices. Because you can't use that license. You can't use that telecom license for something else. You just heard the HDFC Bank guys say, you heard Bhargav say it. Neither HDFC Bank, nor ICICI Lombard, nor Bajaj Finance will just sit there if prices for what they do drop. So if motor insurance prices drop because new players are entering, ICICI Lombard deploys capital elsewhere. There's plenty to do. Their capital is not necessarily has to be committed to just one thing. If prices drop there, a smart CEO reallocates the capital elsewhere in financial services. That's the fundamental difference between a sector like telecom and financial services. And that's why in financial services, you look for smart capital allocators. You look for CEOs, you look for management teams who use intelligence and judgment to figure out when to ramp up exposure and when to ramp down exposure. Our submission to our clients would be ICICI Lombard has done that supremely well. And that's the reason these guys have compounded profits at 21% over 15 years in an industry where profits have compounded at 0%. Tej?
We spoke about one threat to the sector. Question from Gaurav is, what are the things that you worry about? What are the risks and threats that you think about apart from competition? And what are you doing to mitigate those risks?
One is nothing to do with the sector. One is to do with all leading companies. I think the biggest risk to a company which is a leader is in itself. Leaders typically get complacent, and that's the beginning of the end of their organization. So I think if there's one thing that personally I communicate with my team consistently is that we need to remain paranoid, we need to remain hungry, we need to remain focused on improving every single day. Just because we are where we are doesn't mean that we are, doing everything perfectly. So there's a lot of scope to improve, and there is that hunger has to remain. So that's number one. I think if you look at specific to insurance, the only worry that we have is sustained capital flow, which does not understand how to create value. Apart from that, everything else, I mean, traditionally, if you look at insurance, you worry about the reason why insurance companies go down is either because of proper or improper underwriting, improper reserving, or inadequate reinsurance. I think all of those three things we are very, very confident about what we are doing, so we don't worry about that. I think the only worry is the point that sort of made that if someone comes in with, or not someone, a lot of people come in with a lot of capital, which doesn't understand how to create value in insurance, that's a problem. If you look at, and I say this very often, so without, undermining any type of capital providers, I think in the last 5 years, one of the real issues that we've faced is that there is a lot of capital which has come in, largely private capital, which has valued companies on GWP. There can be nothing more silly or stupid than that. When you go out and talk to insurance experts or investors who understand insurance, they just can't understand how people value insurance companies on price to GWP. It makes no sense. It's very easy to grow the business, but you'll lose your shirt in the longer term. But that's how people have been valuing companies for some time. It'll go away because it just cannot sustain. So the real risk is lot more companies come in with that mindset, or a lot more capital comes in with that mindset, saying that let me grow a business. This is a fantastic business, and there's a rainbow there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So let's build for the future. Do I see that risk? I think the risk was very high for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm seeing it kind of toned down a little bit because people are beginning to understand that that's not how you create value in insurance.
And just to be clear, right, there are lines of business that we see ICICI Lombard having. So, for example, fire and marine. So, say, insuring this facility or, say, a big factory from flood or fire. For that, if it's a big factory, the insurer needs to reinsure. What the work that Tej does, the work that our colleague in financial services, Keshav, does, that's telling us that the world's largest reinsurers are not willing to insure too many Indian insurers other than ICICI Lombard. So if you want a big factory reinsured against flood or fire, there aren't that many insurers you can go to because there are not that many insurers in India that a Swiss Re or a Munich Re will reinsure. That gives these guys the ability to earn massive profits in flood or fire. So one day, perhaps, Tej, on a webinar, you can just lay out why ICICI Lombard doesn't need to kill itself trying to chase market share in, say, motor because they're able to make money elsewhere in the market. The new players who are doing motor, the new players who are coming into motor, they don't have flood or fire. Why don't they have flood or fire? Because they won't get reinsurance. They won't get reinsurers backing out their risk. And that's where our job becomes very interesting. The market sees a new entry, the market squeezes the share price. Colleagues like Tej get excited. They say the market's misunderstanding. The market's misunderstanding how insurance works or how lending works, and that creates opportunities for us. I'll do one more. So Jignesh Mehta has got a very intriguing question for you guys. So he's asked, what is the one business KPI? What is the one business KPI around which everybody in ICICI Lombard, from the CEO to the security guard, is aligned? Very clever.
That's an interesting one. I mean, I don't think we give KPIs of that nature to the security guards, but I think the culture or the alignment that we want to create is customer experience. It's not a KPI in that sense. The KPIs that we have as an organization is, it's balanced, and there are a couple of other things that rolls down to the front line. But customer experience and customer service is not necessarily something that is just through the KPI. It's also through the culture, and that's a messaging that goes, even though the security guard is an outsourced employee who doesn't have our KPI.
Thank you. Last question. I think Tej is going to ask the last question.
The last question is again on culture. You've seen a lot of people within the industry. You spoke about a lot of leaders within the industry have come from ICICI Lombard. Given that you've seen leaders move out. How have you maintained to retain the same culture as you've grown over the past 15 years? The organization's grown larger. How does the organization ensure that the same culture of significantly smaller organization is continued when the organization has become something which has a 10% market share in the industry?
You know, one of the tendencies that we have, probably because of this general media hype around great leadership, is that, you know, great heroic leadership gets a lot of visibility. I think true value is created in creating an organization which is not dependent on one individual. One of the things that we say internally, and my colleagues come and tell me that, you know, let's say someone from, let's say a corporate business group goes and, you know, moves to some other organization, he thinks, or usually it's he, but he or she thinks that his relationship will shift to that company. Just doesn't happen. Because it's not just about one aspect of business. It's not just about relationship. It's the entire ecosystem which is working to make that happen for business, right? So we've lost people, let's say, I'm specifically using corporate you know, solutions business, because those are very, very individual relationship driven business, right? And nothing's happened to our business. You know, initially we used to fret, this guy will take some of our business away, but nothing happens. So I think it's about creating the institutional processes, the institutional culture, the entire DNA, the narrative constantly and consistently. And that's important. So as I said, you know, we do lose people because a lot of the leadership has gone from ICICI Lombard, and we are very, in that sense, very, very happy. We wish them well. But the next set of people step up. That's what happens.
Thank you very much, Bhargav. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for very much for making your time available. And we're confident our investments business sale fans. Thank you.
Saurabh and Tej, I would request you to hand over the token of appreciation to the ICICI Lombard team. Okay.